It didn't matter who won the election this past November. Either way, the winner was going to be a New Yorker, the first in the White House since the Roosevelts.
Mr. President, you ought to know that this nation is more a tale of two cities than it is just a shining city on a hill.
After his rousing speech at the 1984 Democratic National Convention, many were convinced that New York Governor Mario Cuomo was on a path to the White House. By 1992, Cuomo was ready and expected to run. On the very last day to file for the New Hampshire primary, the plane was waiting on the tarmac at the Albany airport.
His son and his aides had the airplanes waiting on the tarmac in Albany, one for the press, one for him, and we were all set to go.
But a bitter budget battle in Albany changed his mind. Some political pundits to this day believe Mario Cuomo, had he entered the race, could have won not only New Hampshire, but the White House.
I am convinced Cuomo gets in the race, he beats Bill Clinton, and if he gets that nomination in '92, the way the economy kept going, I'm convinced Cuomo beats Bush and becomes president.
A new documentary by our colleagues at New York Now looks back on Cuomo's flirtations with running for president, and then his loss 2 years later to a freshman state senator named George Pataki that ended his political career.
I don't think Mario Cuomo's legacy is a good one. I think he was all talk, no action, that he was able to kind of schmooze the media and the public to a fault.
First, all talk, no action is just factually not correct, right? You just look at his record of accomplishment, tangible record of accomplishment. It is truly significant.
And you can watch that documentary, Governor Mario Cuomo, Poetry and Prose, a week from this Sunday on February 19th at 6 p.m. here on Mountain Lake PBS. And Matt Ryan, who most of you know is the host of New York Now, seen here on Mountain Lake PBS, is here with us to talk about his new documentary. Welcome.
Tom, thanks for having me.
When did you decide to take on this project, and why?
I've been thinking about it for a few years just because I couldn't believe it hadn't been done before. And working where I do at the Albany PBS station, we have the advantage of having all of this exclusive footage from this old PBS program called Inside Albany, which some of your longtime viewers may know. It ran
for a number of years.
From 75 to 2006, and they were really one of the first programs, they were the first program in the state to give you a behind-the-scenes look at what goes on in state government. So they had all this great footage of Mario Cuomo, even back to as Secretary of State in the mid-70s to when he was Lieutenant Governor under Hugh Carey. And then when he ran in 1982, the footage is just outstanding. It's all, it's a land of standard definition, right? And 4:3, but just seeing that video kind of takes you back in time.
You must have been blown away when you went back to see and discovered what you found that ended up in the documentary.
Like a kid in a candy store, or Ken Burns going into the National Archives. Getting back to your original question, Mario Cuomo in 2014 was at the state convention. His son Andrew had just been renominated, and he was down there with his family, and there was a moment where there was an applause line, and the family all got up. Mario got up and went right back into his seat. He got right back up and was kind of shaking his head saying, "Oh, come on, Mario." But you could tell he was getting a little frail. So that's when I tried to get the wheels in motion.
And that was quite a moment that you captured. We aired that when he won and his father was on stage with him there.
Yeah, that was his last public appearance. And Andrew Cuomo, who granted an ultra-rare interview with us for this project, was telling us that his father was in a wheelchair at that point. And he went against the doctor's wishes. When I say he, Andrew said, "Mom, we're taking Pops to the convention. We're gonna have him on stage," and it was quite the moment.
And he talked about that in the interview with you about how he asked him to hold on through Thanksgiving and Christmas and hold on through his inauguration.
Yeah, and it was something else. I mean, it's like straight out of a movie. But Andrew was inaugurated for his second term. He gives a speech in New York City, then gives a second one in Buffalo. His father was listening to the speech via the internet. His family had it up, and he literally died like an hour or two after that.
You mentioned Andrew doesn't do many television interviews.
No.
In fact, I think the last one before yours may have been with Charlie Rose on PBS.
Right.
So that was unusual. Had you requested it for months and months and months,
Yes.
saying, please talk about your father?
When you talk about 11th hour, 58th minute, I mean, this was it. We had asked him in early May, and listen, he's under no obligation to do something like this, but we put out a trailer soon after Labor Day, which I think showed that we had some really great footage and we had some consequential interviews. And it got canceled a couple times, but it finally happened, and how's this for timing? It happened right before the news broke that a former aide of his had some charges against him down in New York City, Joe Prococo. So, you know, that was the last opportunity we had to talk to him. And he was really good. I think viewers will see a part of Andrew Cuomo that they really don't get to see. And that was kind of my whole goal is to show a son talking about his father as opposed to Governor Cuomo talking about Governor Mario Cuomo.
And do you think he knew what some critics had said about his father, Fred Dicker with the New York Post, saying that he really didn't? Yeah, he didn't really have much of a legacy. And do you think he wanted to set the record straight?
That could have been. I think that's probably good speculation on your part. But to be fair, I had more than one person, more than just Fred Dicker, who said all talk, no action. That used that kind of cliche. But as Mark Humber, longtime AP reporter in Albany, said, yeah, he'll be remembered most for giving speeches, but that ain't so bad. And I think that's kind of in a nutshell of Mario Cuomo's 12 years.
And you talk about that. Andrew doesn't hold a lot of press briefings or press conferences.
Not
in fact,
lately.
they've
Not
dwindled
lately.
in the past couple of years even more. His father was just the opposite.
You had total accessibility, and I think that's what people who watch this film will see is that he had tons of press conferences. Back in the day, you could go on the press. There was a press plane, that accompanied him, whether he went to Utica or Plattsburgh or Watertown, and he would do live call-in radio shows. He would do live call-in TV shows on PBS. He did that for years. No one does that nowadays. On TV, where you can see body language, and that can turn into a GIF or a Vine or some other thing on social media. And then he would tell his detail to stop the car. I want to talk to the protesters. Again, who does that nowadays? I mean, it's really a bygone era.
Exactly, and to have that program inside Albany, which for its time was cutting edge, because a lot of stations wouldn't dedicate those resources to covering state government.
Sure.
So to have all of that was just a treasure trove for you to have to put the documentary together.
No question. I mean, we both worked in the news industry. In a 30-minute newscast, you're lucky if you get more than 90 seconds or 100 seconds on something going on at the Capitol. So yeah, this was the place to find out what was going on in state government. And when you see the video of Mario Cuomo and him being so accessible, you can't help but admire that, because a lot of politicians don't do that nowadays. His son is not nearly as accessible as his father was.
The documentary focuses on some of the most important points in his career. It begins in 1982 when he challenged Ed Koch, mayor of New York City, for the Democratic nomination to run for governor, and how that turned into just a knockdown, drag-out battle.
It was something. I mean, two titans of the party, not necessarily then, but later on. It was a great match, and as Andrew Cuomo admitted to me, there was no love lost between the two of them.
Then in 1984, one of the highlights of
his apex
of Mario Cuomo's career, really, gave the keynote address at the Democratic convention in San Francisco. Still talked about to this day, the shining city on the hill speech. And for him, that truly was one of the highlights of his career.
No question. I mean, when I was down in Washington, we did a couple interviews down there, and talking to people on the Hill, there's only really two keynote speeches that are constantly brought up around Capitol Hill, and that's Barack Obama's keynote in 2004 and Mario Cuomo's in 1984. And for New Yorkers, they talk about it with a great sense of pride. But in the documentary, you'll see something really fascinating, is that you'll see him field test the speech a week before he gave it in front of, a couple hundred people. I think it was at the College of St. Rose in Uptown in Albany. And we are probably the only organization on planet Earth that has that video, and it's a wonderful contrast to see him kind of field test that speech. It's not verbatim what you see, what you heard in the DNC speech, but it's awfully close. It's fascinating.
And then you have a reporter following up. You have a press gaggle with the governor at the time, asking him about that.
That's right. Dave Hepp, who was the longtime host and executive producer of Inside Albany, said, "Governor, I've never heard this speech quite before in this context. Is this new?" And Mario Cuomo just has this like devilish smile that comes across his face, and he said, "Yeah, as of Saturday."
So in 1984, a number of people at the time said, we wish Mario Cuomo was our candidate, not Walter Mondale.
That's right.
And then the presidential talk continued. A lot of people thought in 88 that he would certainly be throwing his head into the ring, which he didn't. And then it came 1992, and he was ready to run. But the budget battle, the budget deficit in Albany derailed his plans.
Nowadays, when someone hits a grand slam home run like that at the keynote speech, of course they're running 4 years later, right? First, he did look into it a little bit, but he ultimately decided not to do it. 92 was a whole different story. I mean, that's something I think people will really find fascinating, is that yes, he and his team really did look into running for president, and he was up in the polls that were out before he even made his final decision, showing him up by 15 or 20 points. I mean, can you imagine someone not entering the race nowadays with that being the case? But yes, there was a budget battle that was going on, and I had some people tell me off the record that one of the last people, if not the last person he talked to, was Tim Russert, the longtime host of Meet the Press and a former aide of his from 82 to 84. And he was saying, "Governor, you're going to get hammered if you don't have a budget," by folks like Bill Clinton, Paul Tsongas, and others who were running in 92.
What does his son say about that? And does he think that he made the right decision, or does he think that his dad later regretted that decision?
Andrew says that I kind of had to parse what I thought was real and maybe what part he was kind of trying to protect his legacy. But I truly think that he didn't think he wanted to run because he didn't have the fire in the belly. But he did say he really felt the pressure and the burden from supporters of his who really wanted him to run. And he said that's the reason why he kind of explored this transition team or exploratory committee, if you will, because he felt that pressure because so many people wanted him to run back then. But people in New York will remember he was more popular outside of the Empire State than he was here.
Do you think in later years he regretted the decision, second-guessed it?
Andrew Cuomo told me that not really, but if there was one he regretted not pursuing, and that was the Supreme Court, because in the spring of '93, Bill Clinton was set to offer him a position on the Supreme Court. There was a retirement. And in the '92 election, Bill Clinton said he wanted to kind of go out of the box for his next Supreme Court choice, and he had mentioned Mario Cuomo. And Andrew said that Mario came to multiple decisions on that. And you'll hear from the lieutenant governor who said, Mario said, "I want that job." For whatever reason, though, Andrew said he thought he could get another term as governor in 1994, and as we know, that never happened.
Because he withdrew his name in '93.
That's right. I mean, at the last second, Andrew Cuomo was going back and forth with George Stephanopoulos, who was Clinton's communications director at that point. Again, a lot of drama, but in the end, Mario chose not to go.
So he wanted to run in '94, go for a fourth term, and that's where they ran into a freshman state senator named George Pataki.
He's got a place up here in the North Country.
He does now. Yeah.
You know, he was a Republican who was pro-choice and someone who had pretty much a clean slate, and that's what Al D'Amato, the longtime Republican U.S. senator, really wanted. Because there was a theme back then, anyone but Cuomo, ABC. And they got someone who didn't have much of a record. I don't say that in a negative way, but there wasn't much to go against. And he was pro-choice, which was important to try to get some of those Democratic voters or the people in the middle. And in the end, George Pataki pulled it off. It was a complete opposite of what happened at the beginning of the film. The David versus Goliath, when David was Mario Cuomo, and then 12 years later, it was just the opposite.
How devastating was that to him?
Very. Andrew said it was one of the toughest things he's ever had to live with because he had to walk around as a loser. That's his words. And that really hurt him for a long time, but he talked about how his election in 2010 for his first term was kind of redemption not only for Mario, to see his son elected to that office, but for Andrew as well. He talked about how he struggled. He went through a very public divorce, and then in the tabloids down in New York City, he ran for governor in 2002, and a lot of people didn't think it was his turn. That's when Carl McCall, the first African American, a lot of people wanted him to get that Democratic nomination, which he eventually did. So 2010 was a redemption for both Mario and Andrew.
The first father-son team to
That's
govern
right.
in New York State.
That's right.